Hey guys, welcome back to Game Master Tips. It's me, Andrew, Game Master of Bastions and Boats, and we're going to talk about dungeons. There's a lot of options that you can do with dungeons, whether you do a sprawling underground labyrinth to a simple house that's more than meets the eye. And figuring out what you want to do with those dungeons can sometimes feel a bit difficult or overwhelming depending on situation. But the easiest way to go about it is kind of figuring out where you want that dungeon. Whether it's out in the woods in, as I said earlier, a giant cave system, or possibly in an abandoned fortress, a small house on the outskirts of the town, or possibly in a large evil keep of the big bad. But each one can be varying on what you want it to be. There's a lot of types within those that you can do, whether it's something like a dungeon filled with little kobolds that the players are now hitting, 5th, 6th level, so these kobolds could be thrown around like it's nothing. What can you do to keep them more interesting? Or it'd be traps. Making sure that those players have to sit there and instead of constant combat encounters, they're dealing with trap encounters. Things that are taking them a bit off guard a little bit, throwing them a couple curveballs, such as gas traps where maybe somebody accidentally leaned up against the wall a little bit and caused a bunch of poisonous gas to start filling the room as they accidentally pressed a wall-mounted pressure plate, or the simplistic, oh, I tripped over a cord on the ground, pulled it, and now darts are firing at me. Stuff like that can be a lot more useful than you'd expect. Mainly when it comes to giving your players a bit more oomph, and instead of just stabbing everything, they have a chance to really think about it. Giving them that thought process can be fantastic. But you also have to think about difficulty. Whether it's simple little things like, oh, they have to make a detect trap check depending on which edition you're playing. And it could be either really low, it could be really high, dependent on who made the trap. So like kobolds, goblins, they'd probably be pretty easy to spot to a degree. But then you have traps set in a lich's lair deep underground in some forgotten old wizarding school or something like that, where these traps set off fireballs, explosions, different kinds of acid traps. Maybe a gelatinous cube falls from the ceiling on top of them, giving them an even more deadly encounter than just handing them a bunch of monsters to fight. Now, going about deciding what you want to do with these dungeons is a lot easier than you think it is. Whether you go from a bunch of goblins that your party has rid the town of to giving them a bit more push in a direction, since you just built that pretty little town, maybe you need to go and clear out the goblin's old hidey hole, which turns out was once the lair of an ancient dead dragon, or maybe it was the lair of an old lich that used them as their little pawns to do what they wanted, get them food, get them drinks, get them adventurers' gear, or just learning stories about the world. And from there, you can kind of build off of that. Do you want it to be a really long dungeon, a bunch of corridors, a lot of rooms, monsters, traps? Or do you want it to be short and sweet, but with a bit more of a punch? And in that regard, there's a lot you can do. Like what I have in my hand right here is from the Pathfinder 2nd edition starter box. And it's a very interesting and pretty intricately large dungeon, where it goes from what looks to be a underground temple, for what I'm just looking at this, that has small catacombs and caves that lead to different sections off the beaten path. And it's incredible to build a dungeon like this. Big, vast, secrets everywhere. But you gotta think about your player levels. You gotta think about the monsters you want to use. And if there's more than just brute forcing or trap disarming that they need to do to get through it, such as puzzles. Adding a puzzle to a dungeon can make a huge difference outside of just throwing traps and throwing monsters at players. And figuring out puzzles can be a lot of work, and it can be very time consuming, which I personally think not rhymes, but riddles and like simplistic things in a room can be a lot more difficult for your players to figure out than you'd expect, such as maybe there is a giant bowl in the center of the room, nothing else really in there, but it's bone dry. Everything around seems to have like etchings of water or cups with people drinking, and that could be just a subtle hint for your players to really actually have to think about it. Like, oh, why are all these paintings on the walls covered in people drinking wine or sitting around a table enjoying punch of some sort? And there you have it. The answer is putting some kind of liquid in that bowl, which causes a door to open. Maybe it reveals a hidden chest that lifts out of the ground for them to plunder and explore and find the riches or the way to the next room that they've been searching for. To be honest, dungeons can be very specific when it comes to utility as a game master. Making sure your players have fun with it, making sure you're able to have fun with it, and making it so it doesn't feel like it's dragging on too long or that it didn't last long enough. For those, you're going to have to base it off feel. If you see your players starting to slowly sit there and go, another room, then you should try to figure out a way to condense the rest of what you had planned into either one or two rooms beyond that one instead of the 6 or 7 you had planned, or just cut a bunch of it and let them get to that big bad evil fight, or let them get to the treasure a little bit sooner to let them feel that gratification a bit sooner and have less negatives to say about the session. If it's too short, throw in another boss. Maybe collapse the front of the cave or possibly figure out a way to keep them in there with small little secrets that you can kind of tag on as you need to, such as, oh, there's a secret door that's actually behind the final room that they suddenly stumbled upon, giving you a chance to kind of wing it a little bit, but keep it in the same tone as what you were just doing. Whether it's a giant orc encampment hidden amongst the trees, or like in Curse of Strahd, the Death House. I'd consider that one of the best designed dungeons for early level characters. A simplistic house filled with monsters, ghosts, evil entities constantly running amok around it, with a nice little story slightly tacked on to give more of an oomph for the players, such as when it comes to the Death House, the 2 kids being ghosts the whole time, asking you to help them well, saved their house for the most part. And then at the end of it all, you found out, well, spoilers, shouldn't go that much further, but adding a little bit of story into a dungeon can be great. One thing I've done before with a dungeon is have it be an old mine, or possibly just an old keep from a city long past, where, for all of the players know, there could be secret riches that the monsters I've now taken over have not found. But I know I've rambled a bunch about different small sections of dungeons, whether it be traps, monsters, a little bit of story to mix it in, and then dealing with other sections of it as well when it comes to treasures and riddles and things for them to do. The best way to go about any of this, though, to end off this video anyway, is make a dungeon based off of what you feel is right for your game. Instead of just making something for them to do, make it something that connects, even if it's the most minute bit, to the overall story you want to tell. So maybe they see the etchings of a great dragon that had conquered the land millennia ago, and that just happens to be the same dragon that has returned to reclaim its land and its old horde. And for them, they just get to see that snippet. Or you find an old lich's lair filled with broken artifacts, destroyed vials, and burnt up scrolls, for them to be a bit more intrigued by and kind of push it in that direction. So if you're having fun with your games and you're enjoying your time watching me, thank you so much. Now go dungeon crawling. Have a good night.